All right, excellent. Good morning, good afternoon, depending where you're based. Welcome to Power BI for Government. Number 15, Community of Practice. A little bit of housekeeping before we kick off. So this session today is being run by a Teams webinar. So because there's quite a few of us in the room, I would ask if you've got any questions, please drop them in the chat. And I'll moderate them during the presentation, and I will interrupt and ask questions for you. This session is being recorded, so if you need to drop off early or you know someone who would have loved to have been here, I will give you the recording. I'll send an email at the end of the session with a link, and again, I host that up on YouTube, so you will get a copy of this recording. Again, please do keep your mics on mute, and questions, drop them in the chat, or raise your hand if you do have a question during the question time, and I'm happy to hand over to you. For those who haven't been here before, the Power BI for Government Community of Practice, this is a place where essentially we do user stories, learning opportunities, and updates in the world of Power BI, exclusively for government, focusing on government data and solutions. For those of you who haven't met, my name's Warren Dean, founder at DataTail. I am very close to nearly training 2,000 people. So if you haven't trained in Power BI or you know people in your organization, please do reach out, trying to hit that magic 2,000 trainees. But if you need Power BI training or you need Power BI report development, please yell out. More than happy to have a talk about the services we can offer you. I just wanted to showcase, this is a Power BI report I worked on this month with Maribyrnong City Council, and this is taking their census data, and it's a public-facing report. Actually, I'll bring it up. I'll send you the link in the email if you want to have a look at it. But this is looking at their early years neighborhood, and it's majority all census data. And if you haven't seen the new cards in Power BI, this is using the new cards and the reference layers, and so you can go down to various areas and see. Using the census data and comparing different stats. This one was a lot of fun. If you need some kind of use case where you want to use census data to show people in your community different stats, reach out. I'd love to be able to work with you on something like that. I'll send you the link so you can have a play around with that one. For our next meetup this is 25th of April, so after our Christmas break, I'm going to welcome Vita from Marunda. He's going to be talking to us about how they're trialing Copilot and getting it to use. I would love to know if there's any other organizations who are, trialing Copilot, Fabric. It would be good to come and get you to talk to us in the community instead of obviously Microsoft giving us the sales pitch about how great all these things are. Love to know from your point of view, are you using Fabric? Are you using Copilot? What works well, what doesn't work well, and come and share that back with the rest of the community. So if anyone's either trying Copilot or Fabric, please reach out, come and present. We would love to learn from your learnings and apply that in our organization as well. So I will grab the link for that and I'll drop it in the chat for you. So that's next year's first meetup. Again, I do have a book competition. So the complete Power BI interview guide here. Even if you've used Power BI for a while, there was a lot of interesting things in here that I didn't realize that I didn't know. Obviously, Power BI, there is a lot of things in there. So maybe if you know Power BI, you can give to someone else. But this is our competition. So if you want to enter the competition, just register for the next event. And I will draw the winner at the end for the complete Power BI interview guide. So a lot of interesting bits and pieces you might not know in there. I was flicking through it before and it said, make sure, the difference between a report and a dashboard. That's always one of the big ones when I'm talking to people in Power BI and they call everything dashboard. So a lot of interesting learnings in there. But without further ado, we'll jump into today's session. So I'll introduce James Dale from Tecantus. Sorry, I'm going to pronounce that wrong, James. Tecantus. So if you haven't seen James before, I would encourage you to follow him on LinkedIn and his socials. pretty much the GIS guru in the world of Power BI. Now, for those of you who've played around with GIS, you'll know there's a lot of limitations in what we can do, things that we would love to do in Power BI. And James is the man who's pushing it to its boundaries. So really excited to welcome James. Again, if you've got questions in terms of his presentation, drop in the chat and I'll interrupt in that for you. But we will have an opportunity for questions at the end. So James, what I'm going to do, I'll hand over to you and I want to give him the full time. At the end, I'll just do a little bit of a wrap up on what's new in Power BI. So James, I will hand over to you if you want to take over the screen. Thank you. Welcome. And again, I appreciate you staying up for us. What's the time over there?
Oh, it's 1:05 in the morning. It's not a great time, but no. I'm awake. Let's hope it stays like that for the next hour. Cool. Hopefully you can see my screen. Is that coming through okay?
Yes, I can see it. Yep.
So I've only got one slide, and this is it. So I thought we'd do the whole session in Power BI, but I'll introduce myself first, mainly to give you a bit of background about how all of this came about. So obviously I'm James. I've spent the last 20 plus years of my career as a data consultant, most recently for one of the big Microsoft consultancies. But my work in maps started about 8 or 9 years ago in Power BI, right at the very, very beginning of Power BI. And Microsoft had introduced us to a number of customers who all had requirements in their reports for some kind of map, some kind of geospatial analytics that simply wasn't possible with the out-of-the-box visuals. And actually back then, this was before the ArcGIS visual was available. It was before Mapbox custom visual was available. The only options actually in the product were the field map and the Bing map. I'm pretty sure shape map didn't even exist. So right at the beginning, when custom visuals had just been announced by Microsoft. So what I ended up doing for these customers was creating bespoke custom visuals for their map requirements that were really specific, but were able to achieve the kind of output that they needed. And after I'd done a couple of these, it became pretty clear that these weren't isolated cases. Lots of our customers had these kind of requirements, and Microsoft kept sending more and more to us because obviously we'd been able to successfully produce the first few. But the problem is most of our customers weren't able to afford a bespoke, complicated map custom visual for their reports. So with a little bit of cajoling from Microsoft outside work, I ended up building a more generic custom visual called Icon Map, which was released to App Source about 8 years ago now. And that became a large part of my Power BI community work that I do as a Microsoft MVP. Now, over the last few years, the uptake of Icon Map has increased to the point that last year it had nearly 200,000 downloads, and I think the number of users was, Microsoft suggested to me that it was added to over 1.5 million reports in the last 6 months of last year. So potentially millions of users. But the problem with that is, over time, the amount of support calls that I was getting, particularly towards the end of last year, I could have easily spent 7 or 8 hours every day just answering people's requests for help. And this was obviously something that I did outside of work on top of my my day job, and it's just become unsustainable. So the answer has been to quit the day job and turn maps in Power BI into the day job. So in April this year, I started the company Tacantis and built a whole new map visual called Icon Map Pro with the aim of being able to firstly support it properly, but also add all of the functionality based on the feedback that I'd had from the other visual for the last 7 or 8 years. So I hope in this session to give you a bit of an introduction about capabilities of Icon Map Pro and what we can now do in Power BI with maps as a result. Okay, so as I promised, that's my last slide. Let's jump into Power BI Desktop. And I'm going to start completely from scratch with a blank report and pull in some data. So I thought it'd be a good place to start with exploring some of the new functionality, because Microsoft over the last couple of months have made some fairly significant updates to the Azure Maps visual. So just to set the scene, we've actually got 5 map visuals currently available out of the box in Power BI. We've got map visual, we've got filled map, we've got shape map, which is still in preview. Looks like it needs turning on this Power BI desktop. We've got Azure map and we've got ArcGIS map. But as I said, the shape map, 9 years on, has never come out of preview. Microsoft are keen to retire it. And Bing Maps and the filled map have been now officially deprecated.
That one is second.
Oh, hello. And the map visual and the filled map have been deprecated.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Would like to move everybody over to the Azure Maps visual. So let's have a little look first at what we can do with the Azure Maps visual. So I've downloaded some open data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. It's not necessarily particularly exciting, but it is tax data. So let me just import that in. So you can see in this data set, it's at postcode level. So we've got a row for each postcode in Australia, and then we've got a number of different measures in here, all relating to tax. So I'm just going to very quickly do a tiny bit of manipulation. I'm just going to override Power BI's changing the postcode to a number, and I'm going to keep it as text to keep that preceding 0 in there. And then all I'm going to do is unpivot the other columns. So we end up with 3 rows in the data. Got a row for the postcode, and then we've got a column for one of our our different attributes, and then the numerical value of each. So let's quickly load that in. And what I want to be able to do is create what's known as a choropleth map. So I want to be able to pick one of those different attributes and then create a map showing all of the different postcode areas of Australia and be able to shade the colours on those according to the value. So the first thing I'm going to do is add on slicer, pull in attribute. We'll just make that a single select drop down, so I can pick my indicator on here. And then if I bring on the Azure Maps visual, what we should be able to do is drag on postcode into location. Now, of course, the default behavior in Azure Maps is it just displays circles. But we don't want circles, we want the postcode boundaries. So What was new that arrived last month in Azure Maps was the ability to upload a shapefile. So let me load in the postcode boundaries and bind it to the data in your report. But unfortunately, Microsoft haven't necessarily done a great job in this. And it either errors, as you can see, with certain shapefiles, and even if you do manage to successfully bring it in, a lot of the features like auto zooming to the data that you've selected and things like the lasso select tool don't work yet, at least with this visual. So whilst Microsoft are obviously actively working on it, it's probably fair to say that it's not yet ready for use. And the more I interact with the map, the more errors we get. So I'm going to close Azure Maps down because currently it can't produce the map that I want. Our other option is to use the ArcGIS visual. Now, ArcGIS visual, of course, comes with some caveats. We've got two options for using it. We can use it as a guest user, as I just have here, and what that allows us to do is use all of the boundaries that Esri have loaded in of their own. So if I do the same thing and pick location, what I can do in here is choose boundaries, say that we're in Australia, and then we are using postcodes, hit update, and then we will get our postcodes loading, and we could create our choropleth map, but the problem is loading in all of these postcodes and binding them to the postcode data that we've supplied, as you can see, is extremely slow. Now, we do have the option with an ArcGIS subscription to be able to load in our own shapefiles. So if we wanted a different set of regions that ArcGIS didn't support, we could load those into our own ArcGIS subscription, and that might be faster. But if we do that, then we're not able to use Power BI to change the formatting and coloring interactively as we could with the inbuilt regions. So what I want to show you instead is how we would do this with IconMap Pro. Now, if you've not used IconMap Pro before, we can get it from the Custom Visuals Marketplace in AppSource. So if I go to the three dots there, click Get More Visuals, you can see IconMap Pro here just on the home page. Click Add, and that adds it into our report canvas. And then we'll add it on to our report. And then again, I'll just drag in postcode in here. I'm going to drag postcode down here as well. And then similar to Azure Maps, we say we don't want circles. And then in this case, we're going to use our shapes from the file. We're going to upload the file into our report. So just as we did in Azure Maps, I'm going to load in that postcode file, which will just take a moment. So the ones that have turned blue are the ones that we've got data for, the postcode areas with data. The ones that are in grey, we haven't got corresponding data. So now I can just go through and format it. We're going to use Power BI's normal conditional formatting to create a gradient based on our value. So we'll go from white to blue. And we will, I think, let's remove the outline as well so we can see all of those smaller areas. And we'll just turn on the new rendering mode. Let's also say that we don't want these grey areas where it hasn't got data to show. So I can say remove unmapped shapes. And we get a hieroglyph map really quickly that I can pick one of our various indicators. And map will update accordingly. So, super fast way of reproducing a field map in Power BI without having to host our shapes externally. We can now bring them up, store them inside of the report. It renders pretty quickly, and of course it's all interactive and supports things like report page tooltips. Now, previously, we could have also used the Mapbox visual to be able to achieve something similar using Mapbox's ability to bring in a layer. But Mapbox, unfortunately, no longer are supporting the Mapbox visual for Power BI. In fact, it's even based on quite an old API, Microsoft Power BI API. So I'm not entirely sure how much longer, without some significant work, that visual will remain functional. At the moment, it's not being maintained by Mapbox at all. Mapbox have released a source code on GitHub, and it's a Eastern European company that are maintaining it in their free time, but it's not being maintained with any leadership from Mapbox. It's just a third party who decided to pick it up and continue developing it. And I've seen reports that more and more functionalities no longer working in there. So it's probably, I don't know, it's probably not for me to say, but I would have some concerns about continuing to use it without knowing that it was being supported by Mapbox. Right. So this is one example of why we might need to turn to a third-party visual. I'm going to have a look at different type of data now, and then I'm going to move on to some other reports that we're not going to build from scratch, but I want to walk you through some of the different use cases that we might be able to achieve with ICOMAP Pro. But I want to show this one first. So this again is open data. I'm afraid it's UK based, but my understanding of Australian statistical geographies is limited, and I'm more likely to get things wrong and confuse people than I am with the UK geography. So I'm just going to use this for now. What we've got is crime data, and we've got quite a lot of it. We've got just over 500,000 rows. So every row in this data set relates to a crime that occurred somewhere in England in March last year. And in that data set, we've got the longitude and latitude of where that crime occurred. We've got a statistical geography code, so it's kind of a level of aggregation up, the type of crime, and then I've, just for ease, added a crime count column, just so I don't have to write any DAX in the demo. It just means I can drag the crime count on and it will aggregate up and tell me how many crimes there were, either in that location or by that type of crime. And then I've also added this additional column here called lat long combined. And the reason for that, I'll show you in a moment, but it basically is just the longitude and latitude combined into a single column. And what that gives us is a unique ID for where that crime occurred in a single column that we don't have through any other means. So let me show you why that's useful. I'll start with Azure Maps again. So we're just going to plot circles for now, which Azure Maps deals with pretty well. So we've got latitude and longitude. So let's bring that in. And what we appear to get is a circle on the map for all of those locations where those crimes were committed. Except we've got this little eye icon up here. And this means we need to be careful. If you remember, we had 500,000 rows of data in the data set. But most Power BI visuals have a upper limit of 30,000 rows of data. So actually, what's happening here is the Azure Map visual has performed some kind of algorithm on our data, and it's picked 30,000 rows from that 500,000 rows. And actually, if you read the message here, it says it's prioritizing data points that aren't hidden by neighboring points. So if we're trying to determine where there's clusters of crimes occurring, we might not be able to do that if Power BI is actively taking those clusters of data away to be able to spread those points out across the whole country. So we need a strategy to be able to deal with this. And we've got a couple of options. Obviously, the first thing we can do is filter the data. So I've also got a geographic hierarchy on this data set, so I could filter down to specific parts of the country. But let's check what's happening. Let me add on a card visual and count the number of rows. So even though I've filtered down to look at London, we've still got 85,000 rows of data, which means that we're still throwing away 55,000 rows of data. So it's still not necessarily a safe indication of what's going on. But what we can do is actually not consider how many rows we've got, but how many locations. So if I change our count to a distinct count based on that unique field I created, we've actually got only just over 30,000 locations. So if I pull in that lot combined field and change these to averages, it won't actually change the longitude and latitude because they're unique within that field. What we then get is a circle, 30,000 circles displayed on the map, rather than an approximation of those 85,000 rows. But it's interesting to see what's happened is we've started plotting on the right and then moving across, we've got this kind of vertical line here. And this is where we've hit our 30,000 row limit. So let me show you the equivalent in Icon Map. And we're going to set it up exactly the same way. So we've got that lot combined field. We've got latitude, longitude. I'll drag crime type into circle size. And we get the same thing happen. We get to here and we hit that 30,000 row limit and we get that vertical line. But what we can do in Icon Map Pro is exceed that limit. Well, 90,000 will certainly clear it. And actually, when we plot those remaining 660 rows in here, you can see that we were missing some pretty significant areas here where there was a lot of crime occurring over Heathrow Airport that we just weren't aware of. So being able to do that is pretty useful. But drawing circles on the map isn't necessarily the easiest way of digesting this kind of data. Now we could create a heat map. Let me turn the circles off and drag crime count down to the heat map weight, and we can create a heat map, but we can do that in Azure Maps. So let me show you some of the other options. So this is another way of clustering the data. So let me try and configure this while I'm talking. Let's try resolution 8. Yep, that looks good. So if you've not come across H3, H3 is a spatial indexing grid system that the taxi company Uber came up with. And what it does is it divides up the entire globe as a series of hexagons at different resolutions. And we can set the resolution here within our Power BI report. And you see if I make the numbers smaller, the hexagons get bigger, or I can make it bigger and the hexagons will get smaller. And this gives us quite an effective way of very quickly aggregating up and clustering really large amounts of data in perhaps a way that's a bit more effective than using a heat map. And of course, this will work for all parts of the country. We can zoom in and have a look. The other thing I might want to do, of course, is go back to creating a choropleth map. But I'm going to do something that's one stage further than the one I created of the Australian postcode areas. So let me bring in local authority. But I'm also going to bring in the next level down in the hierarchy as well. So let me go back on here, turn on our shapes. I'm going to upload the local authority boundaries first. So I've only got crime data here for England, but I've also got Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. So let's just filter that out. So just as I did before, I'm going to very quickly set the conditional formatting to be based on the number of crimes. This time we'll keep the, oops, not very good at talking and clicking at the same time. There we go. We'll keep the outline this time, but I will make it black. It's a little bit easier to see what's going on. So we very quickly got our choropleth map back, and of course we can zoom into specific areas. But what I'd like to be able to do is get to that next level of detail down. So we're going to say that we have 2 levels, and we're going to drill down, because what you can choose is to add multiple levels on the map, sorry, multiple layers on the map of different files to show at the same time. But in this case, we're going to do drill down. So we've configured level 1. Now we're going to configure level 2. So I'm going to upload the boundaries of the next level down. There's quite a lot of these. There's about 33,000. So it'll just take a moment to import. It's also converting the coordinate system. So these are all in British National Grid coordinates. So IconMap will automatically convert them into longitudes and latitudes for us behind the scenes. And then we'll just configure the formatting on this level. So each level or each file can have its own individual formatting, which can be useful. We'll change that outline color to black. And now we've done that, what we can do, let's zoom into London to make things a bit bigger, is we can turn on drill down on the map and then zoom into particular local authority areas. And we'll get that next level down in the hierarchy. Let's turn off unmatched shapes again. And then we'll just get those areas of interest. So what we're able to do with IconMap Pro is not only create a one-level choropleth map, but we can zoom in to different areas and create a multi-level drill down choropleth map as well. Right, conscious of time, let me jump out of Power BI Desktop and into Power BI on the service. And I just want to give you some examples of some other types of map and walk through the different capabilities. So I'm going to kick off with this one, I think. So this report represents every single route flown by all of the airlines in the world. So I can either pick an airport or a country or an airline. So if I pick a random airline, you'll see that the map shows the different routes that that airline can fly. There's a lot of them. Scroll down through them, but you get the idea. So one of the features of IconMap Pro is the ability to draw lines on the map. So we can draw lines between two coordinates, and those lines can either be straight, curved, or as they are here, follow the curvature of the Earth. And then using Power BI conditional formatting, we can set the color of the line, the width of the line, the pattern of a line, the transparency of the line. We can make it animated, or that dash pattern animated to make, it's quite useful for showing direction. We can also add text labels on the line, and we can add arrows as well. All of those individually configured on a line-by-line basis. So loads of different capability there. Now, the next report, I usually show a slightly different version of this report. So up in my attic above me, I have a little Raspberry Pi mini computer connected to an antenna, and it's listening to all of the aircraft transponder signals as the planes fly above my house, and it's constantly sending those into Microsoft Fabric through the real-time intelligence workload. And then this Power BI report is set to refresh normally every 5 seconds, and it picks up the latest locations of where the planes are in the sky. Unfortunately, at this time of night here, well, 20 to 2 in the morning, there aren't any planes in the sky. So I'm showing a slightly different version of some pre-recorded data, but it's at least showing the same capabilities in Power BI. So on this report, we're showing images. So we've got images for all of the aircraft. And again, through conditional formatting, we can show a different images. So we've got a different image for the different types of plane. We can set the size of those images, and we can rotate those images around by 0 to 360 degrees. So in this case, our planes are pointing in the direction of travel. And then, of course, on this report as well, we're also drawing line strings to show the history of where those planes have been. And I've also added where we've got them, the flight numbers. Now, I've been collecting this data now for some months. So I've been constantly recording the locations of all of the planes that I've detected above my house. And I'm storing about 360 million rows of data. So what I've done here is I've used that H3 hexagon grid system again to record, or represent rather, the noisy areas of airspace. Essentially, how many times the colouring of the hexagon relates to how many times I've detected a plane within that hexagon. So you can start to see, the patterns of the airspace of where all the planes are travelling, perhaps where you might not want to buy a house underneath. Move away from aviation. So when we were creating the choropleth maps a few minutes ago, those maps were all created by uploading in that case an Esri shapefile, but it could be a KML file or a GeoJSON file, into the Power BI report itself. Now that's okay for relatively small amounts of polygons or simple polygons, but if you have a really large number of shapes or really complicated shapes, that approach doesn't scale very well. So in this report, all of the polygons, instead of being uploaded in and stored within the Power BI file in the visual, instead they're being sourced out of a, I think it's a SQL Server database. So the actual outlines of the polygons are actually stored as data in the Power BI dataset. And to show you what we can do with that, let me change the formatting on this. So everything in color on this map is coming out of the Power BI dataset. So as I mouse over all of these different houses or buildings or parks or streets or schools, there you go, that's Highbury Grove School. We're able to pick up any related metadata that's also in our Power BI dataset about those properties. Look, see, we've even got individual trees in the park here. Now, I've also brought in 30 years worth of house price data as well. So what I could do is use the lasso tool and select an individual set of houses, and then the rest of the report will update to show the last 30 years of house price history for those individual set of houses that I've selected on the map. So it's a really powerful way of bringing in really large amounts of geospatial data. So I've got about 100 million rows of house price data and many, many more polygons, because I've loaded in every single building, street lamp, park, tree, road, river, railway line across the whole of London. Let me, this one. So this one's also pulling in the boundaries from the Power BI dataset rather than using a GeoJSON file. And you'll recognize this because it's the same dataset we were using just a few minutes ago. So this is crime across London. But one of the benefits we have of loading the shapes into the Power BI dataset is it covers a scenario that I come across a lot when I'm working with government organisations, and that's boundary changes. So in between 2022 and 2023 in the UK, we had lots of local authority organisations merged. So if you have a look up here, if I change the year to 2023, you'll notice that here in Yorkshire and here in Cumbria, where we had lots of different local authorities in 2022, they all merged and became one very large local authority here, and Cumbria split, well, merged into just two local authorities. And we had the same down here as well in Somerset. So loading the data into the Power BI dataset means that the shapes on the map will happily respond to Power BI slices. And we can just use normal Power BI relationships and data mapping to still be able to do the things like drill down. So if I drill down on this new bigger Yorkshire, I can then still go back to 2022 and happily drill down on the smaller local authority, and it will bring up, you know, the appropriate shapes in just the same way. So while we're still looking at choropleth maps, I just want to show one additional one, because I'm conscious that all the examples that I've shown so far, we've only been showing one type of object on the map at a time. Let me pick doctors. So what we've got on this map is again a choropleth map, but instead of crime, the blue to purple areas in the background are showing deprivation. So I can pick different indexes of deprivation, and that will update the choropleth map in the background. So if we want to see deprivation based on income, and then overlaid on top of that, I've got the location of currently every single doctor, but we could change that to be dentist or hospital, whatever it is we want to choose, residential homes, healthcare in prisons, all of those different items, or all of them at the same time, if we really want, can be overlaid on top of that deprivation data. So when it comes, to locating local services, it helps to be able to have that context information overlaid on the map at the same time. Just want to show a couple of other examples. Interesting. The one I flagged to show isn't there, but let me just grab it quickly. This is a report that I still in the process of making, but I thought it was quite a good one to show. I'm assuming it's the same in Australia, but local authorities in the UK also have responsibility for local bus services. So I had a go at bringing in all of the different bus routes and bus stops, in this case in the northeast of England. And I can either pick a particular route and it will highlight that route on the map, or if I know the name of the stop, I can pick a stop and it will show all of the different routes that service that particular bus stop. If I zoom in on there, you can see that we've even got different points for different sides of the road where appropriate, and I can mouse over that bus stop and pick up the the times that the buses stop there. And I'm using conditional formatting to highlight the bus stop that I've selected in the slicer. I also did the same thing with railways. So I loaded in from OpenStreetMap every single railway line in Europe. So you can see these are all of the different railway operators across Europe. And if I pick one, what we should get is, again, all of the different routes that that particular railway operator services. So this is the national operator in the Netherlands, and we've got some different options on here. I can change the size of the circles. You'll notice that excuse me, you'll notice that all of the circles are different colors, which could represent different KPIs, whether the stations are performing particularly well. The lines, we're changing the width of the line based on the maximum speed that the trains can travel there. We could also change the color of the lines to represent the different networks. We've got some warning triangles on here as well to represent alerts. And if I pick a particular route, we also bring on the text labels as well to show the station names. So quite a lot going on in that report. I'm conscious, actually. I didn't really talk about images other than showing the planes. This is probably a better example of showing icons on the map. So this represents incidents that are dummy data, but incidents that might occur in the electricity grid in Ireland. And of course, I can cross-filter the report to show particular incidents. But what's more interesting, if I zoom into the map, we've got multiple layers of additional information on here that only become visible when we hit certain zoom levels on the map. So I'm also bringing in the electricity infrastructure for all of Ireland. So this is electricity overhead cables, and we're showing different colouring based on the voltage. And then if I zoom in far enough, we'll also get all of the poles, the towers holding up those cables as well. So it shows the ability to bring on multiple different layers and have them show it at different levels of zoom. And then finally, so many of these I could walk through, but I quite like this one. So this is the water mains infrastructure for the Canadian city of Victoria, and we can use conditional formatting to colour those pipes by different criteria. So if I colour the pipes by condition, but then I can also use these other Power BI visuals. So if I want to see all of the water pipes that are used to service residential properties under the jurisdiction of Victoria, made of cast iron, that are over 100 years old, we can highlight just those segments of pipe. And then we can use report page tooltips to bring up things like the latest inspection logs or latest comments and other information such as asset numbers or drawings or installation date, that kind of thing. So we can interact either by clicking on the map or by clicking the other visuals to zoom in and filter our report. Now I'm conscious of time. I will stop there and see if we've got any questions.
Yeah, so please do drop your questions in the chat. If you want to ask a question, if you want to put your hand up, and I'll ask you to unmute, but I'll run through the chat questions first. Actually, Ewan, you had a few questions. You've got your hand up. Do you want to go first?
Thank you very much, James and Warren, for this. This has been most beneficial, so I really appreciate your time at this time in the morning. Just quickly, certification and the amount of data that's going out of ICOM map to any other server, and I'm really keen on the Microsoft certification. Can you take us through a little bit about that? Because it's something I'd really like to use, but it's not something that's available to us at the moment.
Yeah, it's obviously a point that's made a lot. So ICOM Map Pro isn't certified. It's not a certified custom visual. Unfortunately, you won't find any map visuals that use background mapping that are certified by Microsoft. The problem is that the criteria for Microsoft to certify a visual is it doesn't call out at all for any external resources. And unfortunately, the one thing that you couldn't possibly fit inside a Power BI visual is a map of the world. So all of the map visuals have to go outside to be able to bring in the background map tiles. And for that reason, Microsoft won't certify it. What we have done, though, so we've got a corresponding website, iconmappro.com. On here, because this comes up a lot, we've created a security white paper, which goes into quite a lot of detail about exactly what's called externally and from which servers. And I guess in some ways we're probably we go outside less than the core visuals, which also do geocoding, which ICOM Map Pro doesn't. So we don't send any of your data from the Power BI dataset to the outside world. So we have no, apart from the background maps, we don't do any processing on our servers at all. And we don't need data from the Power BI dataset to be able to provide those background maps. So whilst we can't get it certified, we are finding that this documentation satisfies a lot of organisations. And what we can do in addition to that is share the source code under an NDA so that your own security teams can go through it and satisfy themselves that that is all it's doing. We'll be very, very happy to support that.
Thank you very much, James. That covers most of it. Just a big thank you for everything you've done in this space. It's actually pushed, the envelope of how to map in Power BI. So much appreciated.
Thank you.
All right, I've got a question from Simon. He says, supporting publishing. So I think he's talking about obviously normal publishing, which is a yes, but possibly publishing to the web might be his question. Is that a possibility?
For published web?
Yeah.
So we do support publish to web. Unfortunately, Microsoft's licensing API doesn't support publish to web. But all that means is that we need to send you a license key, and it's a slightly different pricing model. We obviously, if it's published to web, we can't sell on users because there aren't any authenticated users. So we have a tiered model for based on usage. And there's actually a couple of local government organisations now in Austria that are using IconMap Pro now on their public-facing websites to relay all of their, open data. Haven't got the link, unfortunately, handy, but they've done an amazing job. They look brilliant.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, Abdul would like to know, instead of uploading shapefile or geodatabase files, can we have the ability to load via hosted feature services?
Yes. Yeah. So we support, obviously, uploading files or bringing in the shapes from the data set. But in addition to that, we also support vector tiles. Those vector tiles can be hosted on servers like GeoServer, if you've got those in your organization, or Mapbox tile sets also supported with vector tiles. Or if you've got ArcGIS, then we also support vector tiles for your ArcGIS or ArcGIS feature layers natively. So yeah, is the answer. There's lots of different options in here.
Yeah, excellent. That might lead to this other question from Richard. So they use ArcGIS. Our GIS team use that, but want to extend the capability to the rest of the business and use non-ArcGIS hosted datasets. Sorry if that makes sense.
Not entirely sure, but let me talk around it.
Yeah.
Hopefully it'll answer the question. So for ArcGIS, if you export the data from ArcGIS and then import it into IconMap as a shapefile, then you don't need an ArcGIS license. And if you bring in the data directly from ArcGIS, either through vector tiles or ArcGIS feature layer, then you will need either an ArcGIS viewer license in the same way as you would with Bare Visual, or there's some other options for ArcGIS that we support that Bare Visual doesn't. You can either use an API key or OAuth 2 authentication, and those two options come out of your, I think they call it Azure credits, rather than requiring individual user license. So these two are based on usage, or if you've got viewer licenses, then you can do username and password.
Thanks for that. Just to expand on that a little bit further, just with the GIS team have essentially significant amount of census data that is already loaded in there. Can we access that as well?
How in what format is that census data? Is it just as
So they're mapping it
flat
within
tables, or is it geo-coded into?
It's geocoded. They're mapping it into
Yeah.
in ArcGIS, so they're able to use it within ArcGIS, and that I'm just wondering whether,
So
can
so
have-
you should be able to pull that out as a ArcGIS feature there, but you will need licenses
they
to
have
be able to do
license.
it, if that makes sense.
Good for that. Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Excellent. And last question from Bob. Given the character limits on data in BI when storing shapes in BI, what is the practical limit of representing the complexity of a shape in the terms of precision?
Yeah, understood. So answer this in two ways. I think this first bit isn't what you're asking, but I'll come to the bit I think what you is asking, but I'll cover both. So when you upload a shape file into IconMap Pro, it automatically will simplify that shape for you and reduce, if necessary, the precision of the coordinates to reduce the number of decimal places, so that it uses less space inside of a report. Now, previously you would have had to have used a third-party tool like ArcGIS or QGIS or mapshaper.org to do that for you, but the visual will do it itself. You can tweak the values, so if you don't want it to do that, you can, increase the number of decimal places or reduce the value here, and it will reduce it less or more accordingly. In terms of loading shapes into the data set, so I think you're referring to the limit of the number of characters you can fit in a Power BI column, which is just over 32,000, which is quite limiting.
Equates to between 1,500 and 1,200 points for a shape.
Yep, which, if you've got a complex shape, including those ones I showed earlier of the United Kingdom, particularly around Scotland, where you've got lots of complex coastlines and islands, it won't fit into 32,000 characters. So there's a couple of workarounds. One is to split it into multiple columns, but the one I prefer is to split it into multiple rows, and then use the DAX function concatenate X to bring it back into a single field as a DAX measure. And then the limit in DAX for a text field is around about 2 million characters. So you can fit most sensible features in 2 million characters, especially if it's been simplified a little bit.
May I introduce you to the border of Victoria?
Well, let's have a go. Appreciate Australia's a big country with
it's not that it's big.
In the UK.
It follows a river, and a lot of our LGA boundaries follow rivers.
But presumably it's just the one feature per 2 million characters. I'll have a go for you. And
it's just practically, if we are trying to deal with something like that, what are the practical limits that you give us with what we can and can't do?
Yeah, sure. Well, that's the hard limit. Unfortunately, it's not my limit; it's a Microsoft limit. But that 2 million characters is your absolute maximum, even with the workarounds. But yeah, but in terms of number of shapes, we can bring we're doing quite a lot of performance work at the moment to support more shapes, but at the moment of shapes out the database, probably about 20,000 is realistic. We should be able to get up to hundreds of thousands in the future releases, but they will be limited to those 2 million characters each. There's nothing we can do to get around that, unfortunately.
And Just with the relationships that you're showing here, is this an actual spatial test or is this using an attribute relay?
No, this is entirely modeled in Power BI. There's no spatial joins or anything going on inside the visual.
So we would have to pre-process all of the data to go in here to have those attributes to be usable.
If your data doesn't have a parent, but you don't need it stored within a shape, you'd only need to have the code of your parent and child, in the same table, and then just use Power BI to make that join.
So make the relationship join, but we'd have to pre-process to have the data for that join to work.
Yeah, because Power BI needs to understand how the drill down works for it to be able to filter the rest of the report as well.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. We might have to call time there and just respect that it's like 2 o'clock in the morning for James. So we really appreciate James. Really interesting things. I've put Icon Map Pro's link there. A lot of examples. I'm sure there's a lot more on your website, James, that people can have a look, and there's documentation. You've got James's details there. We've got this recording for you, so I'll send you a link. I'll put James's details in there. Sorry, we weren't able to get around to all the questions, but you can always email James and find out more about the product and its pricing, and get onto James's socials and make sure you support him, because as mentioned, he's pushing the boundaries of GIS in Power BI, and he's doing an amazing job. So thank you, James. Really appreciate you staying up and sharing with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, pleasure to have you. Thanks, everyone. So I'll close the session there. In terms of updates, I might just record something and I'll send it to you separately. Just want to respect everyone's time. In terms of the winner of the book, that goes to James Rand. So James, if you want to shoot me an email, or I'll shoot you an email, send you me details. I'll post that book out to you. But otherwise, thank you, everyone. Appreciate you coming along. I look forward to seeing you at the next session next year. So thanks, everyone, and I'll see you all next time.